The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, he'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, welcome back to South Derbyshire again. I've got two more episodes for you today and tomorrow to round off this little run we're doing down here. Tomorrow's episode is a really tiny one. It's a case of blink and you'll miss it. This one's quite small as well, but it's only the village that's the small part. It'll take me about 10 minutes to walk from one end to the other, so not exactly an urban metropolis. But there is one particular landmark in this one that will take up a lot of my time. Welcome to the very small and very picturesque, when it's not raining, Radbourne. Radbourne, Reed Stream. South Derbyshire continues today with Radbourne, a few miles west of Derby. Again, this is an estate village, but it's a bit different to nearby Trusley. Much like its near neighbour though, the main points of interest are its church and its hall. It would appear that Radbourne was once part of the lands of the Ferrers, the Earls of Derby. They forfeited the lands to the Crown in the 1260s after the Baronial War, which were ultimately used to endow Edmund of Lancaster. A couple of historical notables have lived here. One of them was the medieval knight Sir John Chandos, who was a close friend of Edward the Black Prince. He hailed from Radbourne in the 14th century. Another is Erasmus Darwin, the grandfather of the one and only Charles Darwin. He lived at Radbourne Hall for a short while after his marriage to Elizabeth Pole in 1781. It has been said that Bonnie Prince Charlie stayed one night at the hall in 1745 on his march south when his army was halted at Swarkston Bridge. Now, speaking of the Poles, together with the Chandos family, it's they who take centre stage as far as Radbourne is concerned. We'll be learning a lot about them as we travel around what is another pretty small parish on the whole. That said, Radbourne is expanding. 20 years ago, the parish had less than 100 residents. It's now got a lot more, and that's all down to a series of brand new housing estates on the western edge of Derby. They've encroached into Radbourne Parish, and we'll be seeing what they look like too. Let's go. We start in Radbourne Village, and honestly, there's little to speak of here. The village itself is a tiny affair, located generally on a small, narrow lane. Although it lies in what was once part of the Danelaw, its name is Anglo-Saxon and appears to suggest a name meaning reed stream or red stream. There is a watercourse here, so perhaps it's that. Before the Norman conquest, Radbourne had been held by an apparently relatively minor Saxon tenant known as Wulfsey or Ulsey. That said, he held several estates in Derbyshire, including Chellaston, Kettleston and Weston Underwood. By the time of Doomsday, he'd apparently been totally dispossessed of his lands. However, it is possible that some of his estates survived in his ownership because there are records of a later grant that mention him. It can't be denied that holding Radbourne would have been rather lucrative. The Domesday Book tells us that southern Derbyshire was once the most densely populated part of the county. That figures it's the lowest lying and most fertile part of what is generally a hilly part of England. Radbourne, it seems, was typical of the type of settlement in the southwestern part of Derbyshire, with a population of between 40 and 60. At that time, Radbourne Hall was a long way off being built, but it's likely there was some form of estate building here. There was certainly both a church and a mill, the latter likely on the Reed or Red Stream. The Chandos family have owned the Radbourne estate since the Norman conquest. The estate was granted to Henry de Ferrers, an ally of William the Conqueror, in the 11th century. In 1369, the estate passed to Sir John Chandos' niece, who married into the Pole family. The Chandos-Pole family still own the estate today. Now, the big change that's happened since all of that is the addition of Radbourne Hall. We can't get to that from here, but I can show you where it is. First, though, we have the church. Dedicated to St Andrew, this church dates back to the 13th century with additions in the 14th, 15th and 17th. It contains carved bench ends from Dale Abbey and memorials to the Pole and Delapole families. One of them is to German Pole, the MP for Derbyshire in 1656. The memorial dates from 1684, and generally it's attributed to Grinling Gibbons. There are also several carved oak benches and 2 stone monuments, one being that of Sir Peter de la Pole and his wife. A succession of poles and Chandos poles were rectors here. Kelly's Directory of 1932 describes St Andrew's Church as an edifice of stone in the early English style, consisting of a chancel, a clerestoried nave of 3 bays, a north aisle, a south porch, and a low embattled western tower with pinnacles. It's also got a clock and 3 bells. Archaeologists have tried for some time to determine whether or not this church stands close to the site of the original Radbourne Hall. Unfortunately, that's a question that's not yet been answered. Local legend has it that the old hall was supposedly able to sleep 100 people in beds and have stabling for 200 horses. Okay, so we're on a footpath here which runs down towards a waterway, which we'll see in a second, but this is a massive map of Radbourne Parish. You can see it's quite a big area, and we're only in this little tiny bit here where the church is. You know, there's quite a lot to Radbourne in the sort of surrounding areas, but this is the main nucleus here. This is a very informative board, actually. It tells you about all kinds of things. I mean, the schoolhouse, for example, we've just passed that. That's the house we saw just before we got to the church. That's number 6 on this board. Tells you a bit about that there. There's all sorts of other things. We've got several farms. We've got Smerrill's Farm, Park Farm, Foxfield's Farm, Corner Farm, all sorts of different farms around in this massive area. A lot of this is probably off limits to us as well, because, you know, a lot of this will be up private tracks. If there are footpaths sort of around the area, they're probably out of our way. So, you know, if you want to know a bit more about the sort of geography of Radbourne Parish, this is definitely a good place to come. What we're going to do, though, is we're going to head down towards this waterway here, because that's the next thing on my list, and then basically just turn around and head back, because there's nothing I really want to cover out here. The one thing I do want to cover, though, is Radbourne Hall, which is there, number 1 on this map. We'll see that, or attempt to see that, in a moment. The current Radbourne Hall was built in 1739 for German Pole, a descendant of Sir John Chandos. It was designed by William Smith the Younger, and it's a Grade 1 listed building, made of brick, although its basement is of stone. The surrounding parkland was laid out in 1790 by William Eames. An 18th century Georgian country house, to this day it remains the seat of the Chandos Pole family. It's one of the few landed estates in the UK that's only ever been passed on by inheritance and marriage since the Norman conquest. That's how the Pole family came to be involved. Sir John Chandos was an original Knight of the Order of the Garter, and in 1369 it passed to his niece, who married Sir Peter de la Pole of Newborough, Staffordshire. We've been there, remember? Video linked in today's end screen. The hall has had some notable residents in its time, and I include temporary ones in that number. Perhaps the most well-known was Bonnie Prince Charlie, who it's said stayed here in 1745 whilst marching to Derby. He was, of course, halted at Swarkston. Erasmus Darwin, the grandfather of the great Charles Darwin, lived at Radbourne Hall for 2 years after marrying Elizabeth Pole in 1781. In 1807, Edward Sacheverell Pole adopted the additional surname of Chandos to commemorate his descent from Sir John. Since then, the family surname has been Chandos Pole. Edward Sacheverell Chandos Pole, High Sheriff in 1827, was succeeded in that office by his son and namesake. It was he who extended and modernised Radbourne Hall in 1865. The next major refurbishment occurred in the late 1950s under the instruction of the owner, Major John Walklin Chandos Pole, when part of the extended wing was pulled down. Now, several members of the Pole family have served as High Sheriff of Derbyshire, including Samuel Pole, who was the father of Edward, a Lieutenant General, and Charles Pole, a Member of Parliament. Now, of course, you've every right to be here because you're on a public footpath. It just crosses the hall's parkland. As long as you keep to this, you are absolutely fine. But that is pretty much the best view you're going to get of Radbourne Hall. Now, there are some other places around Radbourne Parish where you can see bits that are related to the hall, but you're not going to get any closer than just there. What we're going to do now is head back to the car park, which is at the top of the village there, drive around all this parkland to the gate lodges where the vehicles actually access that building right there, and then we'll move on to some other bits and bobs within the parish which caught my attention when I planned the route. Oh, and you should also be aware, people, if you are going to walk on this public footpath, this isn't flat. Radbourne Hall is on quite a steep hill, actually. So when you make your way from the church up to where the hall is, where I've just shown you, it's quite a steep climb. The problem is that because it's been raining in the last couple of days, making your way back down this is just as bad as getting up because it's really slippery underfoot. So just a bit of health and safety advice for you there. Now, Radbourne Parish would have a really small population if it weren't for the existence of some rather large housing estates these days. There are two main ones. This is Cotchett village, close to the parish boundary with Burniston. It offers a range of 2, 3, 4 and 5 bedroom homes, each featuring French doors, modern kitchen designs, stylish bathrooms and much more. Cotchett village is theoretically part of Mickleover, a Derby suburb, but these new developments have steadily expanded outwards from the city and over the parish boundary into Radbourne. It is possible, therefore, to state that Cotchett village offers commuters and families the best of both worlds, a brand new home on the edge of a city, which is close enough to the countryside to be considered rural. And this isn't the only new estate in Radbourne either. A bit further up the road is a second new build estate. This one apparently doesn't have a name, but no matter. It's the same kind of story. Let's drive around this one to finish as we make for the last parish in this week's run. See you tomorrow. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.